Chapter 42 of Chicot the Jester by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 42. The Prince and the Friend. We may remember that the Duc de Guise had invited the Duc d'Anjou to meet him in the streets of Paris that evening. However, he determined not to go out of his palace unless he was well accompanied. Therefore the duke went to seek his sword, which was Bussy d'Amboise. For the duke to make up his mind to this step he must have been very much afraid, for since his deception with regard to M. de Monsoreau he had not seen Bussy, and stood in great dread of him. Bussy, like all fine natures, felt sorrow more vividly than pleasure, for it is rare that a man, intrepid in danger, cold and calm in the face of fire and sword, does not give way to grief more easily than a coward. Those from whom a woman can draw tears most easily are those most to be feared by other men. Bussy had seen Diana received at court as Comtesse de Monsoreau, and as such admitted by the queen into the circle of her maids of honor. He had seen 1,000 curious eyes fixed on her unrivaled beauty. During the whole evening he had fastened his ardent gaze on her, who never raised her eyes to him, and he, unjust, like every man in love, never thought how she must have been suffering from not daring to meet his sympathizing glance. "Oh," said he to himself, seeing that he waited uselessly for a look, "women have skill and audacity only when they want to deceive a guardian, a husband, or a mother. They are awkward and cowardly when they have simply a debt of gratitude to pay. They fear so much to seem to love. They attach so exaggerated a value to their least favor, that they do not mind breaking their lover's heart, if such be their humor. Diana might have said to me frankly, 'I thank you for what you have done for me, but I do not love you.' The blow would have killed or cured me. But no, she prefers letting me love her hopelessly. But she has gained nothing by it, for I no longer love her, I despise her." And he went away with rage in his heart. "I am mad," thought he, "to torment myself about a person who disdains me. But why does she disdain me, or for whom? Not surely for that long, livid looking skeleton, who, always by her side, covers her incessantly with his jealous glances. If I wished it, in a quarter of an hour I could hold him mute and cold under my knee, with 10 inches of steel in his heart. And if I cannot be loved, I could at least be terrible and hated. Oh, her hatred, rather than her indifference. Yes, but to act thus would be to do what a Quelus or a Maugiron would do, if they knew how to love. Better to resemble that hero of Plutarch whom I so much admired, the young Antiochus, dying of love and never avowing it, nor uttering a complaint. Am I not called the brave Bussy?" He went home and threw himself on a chair. How long he remained there he did not know, when a man approached him. "Monsieur le Comte," said he, "you are in fever." "Ah, is it you, Rémy?" "Yes, count, go to bed." Bussy obeyed, and all the next day Rémy watched him, with refreshing drinks for his body and kind words for his mind. But on the day after, Bussy missed him. "Poor lad," thought he, "he was tired and wanted air, and then doubtless Gertrude expected him. She is but a femme de chambre, but she loves, and a femme de chambre who loves is better than a queen who does not." The day passed, and Rémy did not return. Bussy was angry and impatient. "Oh!" cried he, "I, who still believed in gratitude and friendship, will henceforth believe in nothing." Towards evening he heard voices in his antechamber, and a servant entered, saying, "It is Monseigneur the Duc d'Anjou." "Let him enter," said Bussy, frowning. The duke, on entering the room, which was without lights, said, "It is too dark here, Bussy." Bussy did not answer. Disgust closed his mouth. "Are you really ill?" said the duke, "that you do not answer?" "I am very ill." "Then that is why I have not seen you for 2 days?" "Yes, monseigneur." The prince, piqued at these short answers, began to examine the room. "You seem to me well lodged, Bussy," said he. Bussy did not reply. "Bussy must be very ill," said the duke to an attendant who stood by. "Why was not Miron called? The king's doctor is not too good for Bussy." When the servant was gone, "Are you in grief, Bussy?" said the duke. "I do not know." The duke approached, becoming more and more gracious as he was rebuffed. "Come, Speak frankly, Bussy," said he. "What am I to say, monseigneur?" "You are angry with me?" "I? For what? Besides, it is no use to be angry with princes." The duke was silent. "But," said Bussy, "we are losing time in preambles. To the point, monseigneur. You have need of me, I suppose." "Ah, M. de Bussy." "Yes, doubtless. Do you think I believe that you come here through friendship, you who love no one?" "Oh, Bussy, to say such things to me!" "Well, be quick, monseigneur. What do you want? When one serves a prince, and he dissimulates to the extent of calling you his friend, one must pay for the dissimulation by being ready to sacrifice everything, even life, if necessary." The duke colored, but it was too dark to see it. "I wanted nothing of you, Bussy, and you deceive yourself in thinking my visit interested. I desire only, seeing the fine evening, and that all Paris is out to sign the league, that you should accompany me a little about the streets." Bussy looked at him. "Have you not Aurilly to go with you?" "A lute player?" "Ah, monseigneur, you do not mention all his qualities. I believe that he has fulfilled other functions for you. Besides, you have a dozen other gentlemen. I hear them in the antechamber." At this moment the door opened. "Who is there?" said the duke, haughtily. "Who enters unannounced where I am?" "I, Rémy," replied the young man, without any embarrassment. "Who is Rémy?" "The doctor, monseigneur," said the young man. "And my friend," said Bussy. "You heard what monseigneur asks," continued he, turning to Rémy. "Yes, that you should accompany him, but " "But what?" said the duke. "But you cannot do it." "And why so?" cried the duke. "Because it is too cold out of doors." "Too cold!" cried the duke, surprised that any one should oppose him. "Yes, too cold; therefore I, who answer for M. Bussy's life to himself and to his friends, must forbid him to go out." And he pressed Bussy's hand in a significant manner. "Very well," said the duke, "if the risk be so great, he must stay." And he turned angrily to the door, but returning to the bed, he said, "Then you have decided not to come?" "Monseigneur, you hear that the doctor forbids me." "You ought to see Miron; he is a great doctor." "I prefer my friend." "Then adieu." "Adieu, monseigneur." No sooner was the duke gone than Rémy said, "Now, monseigneur, get up at once, if you please." "What for?" "To come out with me. This room is too warm." "You said just now to the duke that it was too cold outside." "The temperature has changed since." "So that?" said Bussy, with curiosity. "So that now I am convinced that the air will do you good." "I don't understand." "Do you understand the medicines I give you? Yet you take them. Come, get up; a walk with M. d'Anjou is dangerous, with me it is healthy. Have you lost confidence in me? If so, send me away." "Well, as you wish it." And he rose, pale and trembling. "An interesting paleness," said Rémy. "But where are we going?" "To a place where I have analyzed the air to day." "And this air?" "Is sovereign for your complaint, monseigneur." Bussy dressed, and they went out. CHAPTER XLIII. Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 43 of Chicot the Jester by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 43. Etymology of the Rue de la Jussienne. Rémy took his patient by the arm and led him by the Rue Coquillière down to the rampart. "It is strange," said Bussy, "you take me near the marsh of the Grange Batelier, and call it healthy." "Oh, monsieur, a little patience. We are going to turn round the Rue Pagavin and get into the Rue Montmartre. You will see what a fine street that is." "As if I do not know it." "Well, so much the better. I need not lose time in showing you its beauties, and I will lead you at once into a pretty little street." Indeed, after going a few steps down the Rue Montmartre, they turned to the right. "This," said Rémy, "is the Rue de l'Egyptienne, or Egyptienne, which you like, often called by the people the Rue de la Gizaine or Jussienne." "Very likely, but where are we going?" "Do you see that little church?" said Rémy. "How nicely it is situated. I dare say you never remarked it before." "No, I did not know it." "Well, now that you have seen the exterior, enter and look at the windows. They are very curious." There was such a pleased smile on the young man's face that Bussy felt sure there must have been some other reason for making him enter than to look at the windows, which it was too dark to see. The chapel was lighted, however, for service, and Rémy began examining a fresco of the Virgin Mary, which was a continual source of complaint to the women who frequented the church, as they said that it attracted the attention of the young shopkeepers away from them. "You had some other object in bringing me here than that I should admire the Sainte Marie, had you not?" "Ma foi, no." "Then let us go." "Wait a moment, the service is finishing." "Now let us go," said Bussy, "they are moving," and he walked to the door. "At least take some holy water." Bussy obeyed, and Rémy making a sign to a woman who stood near, she advanced, and Bussy grew suddenly pale, for he recognized Gertrude. She saluted him and passed on, but behind her came a figure which, although closely veiled, made his heart beat fast. Rémy looked on, and Bussy knew now why he had brought him to this church. Bussy followed the lady, and Rémy followed him. Gertrude had walked on before until she came to an alley closed by a door. She opened it and let her mistress pass. Bussy followed, and the two others disappeared. It was 7:30 in the evening, and near the beginning of May. The air began to have the feeling of spring, and the leaves were beginning to unfold themselves. Bussy looked round him, and found himself in a little garden, 50 feet square, surrounded by high walls, covered with vines and moss. The first lilacs, which had begun to open in the morning sun, sent out their sweet emanations, and the young man felt tempted to think that so much perfume, and warmth, and life came to him only from the presence of the woman he loved so tenderly. On a little wooden bench sat Diana, twisting in her fingers a sprig of wallflower, which she had picked, without knowing what she did. As Bussy approached her, she raised her head and said timidly, "Monsieur le Comte, all deception would be unworthy of us. If you found me at the church of Sainte Marie l'Egyptienne, it was not chance that brought you there." "No, madame, Rémy took me out without my knowing where I was going, and I swear to you that I was ignorant." "You do not understand me, monsieur. I know well that Monsieur Rémy brought you there, by force, perhaps." "No, madame, not by force. I did not know that he was going to take me to see anyone." "That is a harsh speech," said Diana sadly, and with tears in her eyes. "Do you mean that had you known, you would not have come?" "Oh, madame!" "It would have been but just, monsieur. You did me a great service, and I have not thanked you. Pardon me, and receive all my thanks." "Madame," Bussy stopped. He felt so overcome that he had neither words nor ideas. "But I wish to prove to you," continued Diana, "that I am not ungrateful nor forgetful. It was I who begged M. Rémy to procure for me the honor of this interview. It was I who sought for it. Forgive me if I have displeased you." "Oh, madame, you cannot think that." "I know," continued Diana, who was the strongest, because she had prepared herself for this interview, "how much trouble you had in fulfilling my commission. I know all your delicacy. I know it and appreciate it, believe me. Judge, then, what I must have suffered from the idea that you would misunderstand the sentiments of my heart." "Madame, I have been ill for 3 days." "Oh, I know," cried Diana, with a rising color, "and I suffered more than you. For M. Rémy, he deceived me, no doubt, for he made me believe—" "That your forgetfulness caused it? Oh, it is true." "Then I have been right to do as I have done, to see you, to thank you for your kindness, and to swear to you an eternal gratitude. Do you believe that I speak from the bottom of my heart?" Bussy shook his head sadly, and did not reply.
"Do you doubt my words?"
said Diana. "Madame, those who feel a kindness for you show it when they can. You knew I was at the palace the night of your presentation. You knew I was close to you. You must have felt my looks fixed on you, and you never raised your eyes to me. You never let me know by a word, a sign, or a gesture that you were aware of my presence. But perhaps you did not recognize me, madame. You have only seen me twice." Diana replied with so sad a glance of reproach that Bussy was moved by it. "Pardon me, madame," said he, "you are not an ordinary woman, and yet you act like them. This marriage—"
"I was forced to conclude it."
"Yes, but it was easy to break."
"Impossible, on the contrary."
"Did you not know that near you watched a devoted friend?"
"Even that made me fear."
"And you did not think of what my life would be when you belonged to another, but perhaps you kept the name of Monsoreau from choice?"
"Do you think so?"
murmured Diana.
"So much the better."
And her eyes filled with tears. Bussy walked up and down in great agitation. "I am to become once more a stranger to you," said he.
"Alas!"
"Your silence says enough."
"I can only speak by my silence."
"At the Louvre you would not see me, and now you will not speak to me."
"At the Louvre I was watched by M. de Monsoreau, and he is jealous."
"Jealous! What does he want then? Mon Dieu! Whose happiness can he envy when all the world is envying his?"
"I tell you he is jealous. For the last 2 or 3 days he has seen someone wandering round our new abode."
"Then you have quitted the Rue St. Antoine?"
"How?"
cried Diana thoughtlessly.
"Then it was not you?"
"Madame, since your marriage was publicly announced, since that evening at the Louvre, where you did not deign to look at me, I have been in bed, devoured by fever, so you see that your husband could not be jealous of me, at least."
"Well, M. le Comte, if it be true that you had any desire to see me, you must thank this unknown man, for knowing M. de Monsoreau as I know him, this man made me tremble for you, and I wished to see you and say to you, 'Do not expose yourself so, M. le Comte, do not make me more unhappy than I am.'"
"Reassure yourself, madame, it was not I."
"Now let me finish what I have to say. In the fear of this man, whom I do not know, but whom M. de Monsoreau does perhaps, he exacts that I should leave Paris, so that," said Diana, holding out her hand to Bussy, "you may look upon this as our last meeting, M. le Comte. Tomorrow we start for Méridor."
"You are going, madame?"
"There is no other way to reassure M. de Monsoreau, no other way for me to be at peace. Besides, I myself detest Paris, the world, the court, and the Louvre. I wish to be alone with my souvenirs of my happy past. Perhaps a little of my former happiness will return to me there. My father will accompany me, and I shall find there M. and Madame de St. Luc, who expect me. Adieu, M. de Bussy."
Bussy hid his face in his hands. "All is over for me," he murmured.
"What do you say?"
said Diana. "I say, madame, that this man exiles you, that he takes from me the only hope left to me, that of breathing the same air as yourself, of seeing you sometimes, of touching your dress as you pass. Oh, this man is my mortal enemy, and if I perish for it, I will destroy him with my own hands."
"Oh, Monsieur le Comte!"
"The wretch! It is not enough for him that you are his wife, you, the most beautiful and most charming of creatures, but he is still jealous. Jealous! The devouring monster would absorb the whole world."
"Oh, calm yourself, comte. Mon Dieu, he is excusable, perhaps."
"He is excusable? You defend him, madame?"
"Oh, if you knew!"
cried Diana, covering her face with her hands. "If I knew? Oh, madame, I know one thing, he who is your husband is wrong to think of the rest of the world."
"But," cried Diana, in a broken voice, "if You were wrong, Monsieur le Comte, and if he were not—"
And the young woman, touching with her cold hand the burning ones of Bussy, rose and fled among the somber alleys of the garden, seized Gertrude's arm, and dragged her away, before Bussy, astonished and overwhelmed with delight, had time to stretch out his arms to retain her. He uttered a cry and tottered. Rémy arrived in time to catch him in his arms, and make him sit down on the bench that Diana had just quitted. CHAPTer 43. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 44 of Chicot the Jester by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 44. How D'Epernon had his doublet torn, and how Schomberg was stained blue. While M. la Henrietta piled signature upon signature, while Chicot consigned Gorenflot to the Corne d'Abondance, while Bussy returned to life in the happy little garden full of perfume and love, the king, annoyed at all he had seen in the city, and furious against his brother whom he had seen pass in the Rue Saint Honoré, accompanied by MM. de Guise and Monsoreau, and followed by a whole train of gentlemen, re-entered the Louvre, accompanied by Maugiron and Quelus. He had gone out with all four of his friends, but at some steps from the Louvre, Schomberg and D'Epernon had profited by the first crush to disappear, counting on some adventures in such a turbulent night. Before they had gone 100 yards, D'Epernon had passed his sword sheath between the legs of a citizen who was running, and who tumbled down in consequence, and Schomberg had pulled the cap off the head of a young and pretty woman. But both had badly chosen their day for attacking these good Parisians, generally so patient, for a spirit of revolt was prevalent in the streets, and the bourgeois rose, crying out for aid, and the husband of the young woman launched his apprentices on Schomberg. He was brave, therefore he stopped, but put his hand on his sword and spoke in a high tone. D'Epernon was prudent, he fled. Henri had entered his room at the Louvre, and seated in his great armchair, was trembling with impatience and seeking a good pretext for getting into a passion. Maugiron was playing with Narcissus, the large greyhound, and Quelus was sitting near. "They go on," cried Henri, "their plot advances, sometimes tigers, sometimes serpents. When they do not spring, they glide." "Oh, sire," said Quelus, "are there not always plots in a kingdom? What the devil could all the sons, brothers, and cousins of kings do if they did not plot?" And Quelus irreverently turned his back to the king. "Here, Maugiron," said the king, "with what nonsense he tries to put me off." "Well, sire, look at Narcissus. He is a good dog, but when you pull his ears he growls, and when you tread on his toes he bites." "Here is the other comparing me to my dog." "Not so, sire. I place Narcissus far above you, for he knows how to defend himself, and you do not." And he also turned his back. "That is right," cried the king. "My good friends, for whom they accuse me of despoiling the kingdom, abandon me, insult me. Ah, Chicot, if you were here—" At this moment, however, the door opened, and D'Epernon appeared, without hat or cloak, and with his doublet all torn. "Bon Dieu!" cried Henri, "what is the matter?" "Sire," said D'Epernon, "look at me, see how they treat the friends of your majesty." "Who has treated you thus?" "Mordieu, your people, or rather the people of M. le Duc d'Anjou, who cried, 'Vive la Messe! Vive Guise! Vive François! Vive everyone, in fact, except the king." "And what did you do to be treated thus?" "I, nothing. What can a man do to a people? They recognized me for your majesty's friend, and that was enough." "But Schomberg?" "Well?" "Did he not come to your aid? Did he not defend you?" "Corboeuf! Had he enough to do on his own account?" "How so?" "I left him in the hands of a dyer whose wife's cap he had pulled off, and who, with his 5 or 6 apprentices, seemed likely to make him pass an unpleasant quarter of an hour." "Par la mordieu! And where did you leave my poor Schomberg? I will go myself to his aid. They may say," continued he, looking at Maugiron and Quelus, "that my friends abandoned me, but they shall never say that I abandoned them." "Thanks, sire," said a voice behind Henri, "thanks, but here I am. I extricated myself without assistance, but mein Gott, it was not without trouble." "It is Schomberg's voice," cried all, "but where the devil is he?" "Here I am," cried the voice, and indeed in the corner of the room they saw something that looked not like a man, but a shadow. "Schomberg," cried the king, "where do you come from, and why are you that color?" Indeed, Schomberg from head to foot was of a most beautiful blue. "Der Teufel!" cried he, "the wretches! It is not wonderful that the people ran after me." "But what is the matter?" "The matter is that they dipped me in a vat, the knaves. I believed that it was only water, but it was indigo." "Ah, mordieu!" cried Quelus, bursting out laughing, "indigo is very dear. You must have carried away at least 20 crowns worth of indigo." "I wish you had been in my place." "And you did not kill anyone?" "I left my poniard somewhere, that is all I know, up to the hilt in a sheath of flesh, but in a second I was taken, carried off, dipped in the vat, and almost drowned." "And how did you get out of their hands?" "By committing a cowardice, sire." "What was that?" "Crying 'Vive la Ligue.'" "That was like me, only they made me add 'Vive le Duc d'Anjou,'" said D'Epernon. "And I also," cried Schomberg, "but that is not all." "What, my poor Schomberg, did they make you cry something else?" "No, that was enough, God knows, but just as I cried 'Vive le Duc d'Anjou,' guess who passed?" "How can I guess?" "Bussy, his cursed Bussy, who heard me." "He could not understand." "Parbleu, it was not difficult to understand. I had a poniard at my throat, and I was in a vat." "And he did not come to your rescue?" "It seemed as though he was in a dreadful hurry; he scarcely seemed to touch the ground." "Perhaps he did not recognize you, as you were blue." "Ah, very likely." "He would be excusable," said the king, "for indeed, my poor Schomberg, I should hardly have known you myself." "Never mind, we shall meet some other time when I am not in a vat." "Oh, as for me," said D'Epernon, "it is his master I should like to punish." "The Duc d'Anjou, whose praises they are singing all over Paris," said Quelus. "The fact is that he is master of Paris to night," said D'Epernon. "Ah, my brother, my brother!" cried the king. "Ha! yes, sire, you cry my brother, but you do nothing against him, and yet it is clear to me that he is at the head of some plot," said Schomberg. Mordieu, that is what I was saying just before you came in, to these gentlemen, and they replied by shrugging their shoulders and turning their backs." "Not because you said there was a plot, sire, but because you do nothing to suppress it." "And now," said Quelus, "we say, 'Save us,' sire, or rather save yourself. To morrow M. de Guise will come to the Louvre, and ask you to name a chief for the League. If you name M. d'Anjou as you promised, he, at the head of 100,000 Parisians excited by this night, can do what he likes." "Then," said Henri, "if I take a decisive step, will you support me?" "Yes, sire." "If, sire, you will only give me time to remodel my dress," said D'Epernon. "Go to my room, D'Epernon, my valet de chambre will give you what you want." "And I, sire, must have a bath," said Schomberg. "Go to my bath." "Then I may hope, sire, that my insult will not remain unavenged." Henri remained silent for a moment, and then said, "Quelus, ask if M. d'Anjou has returned to the Louvre." Quelus went, but came back and said that the duke had not yet returned. "Well, you, Quelus and Maugiron, go down and watch for his entrance." "And then?" "Have all the doors shut." "Bravo, sire!" "I will be back in 10 minutes, sire," said D'Epernon. "And my stay will depend on the quality of the dye," said Schomberg. "Come as soon as possible," said the king. The young men went out, and the king, left alone, kneeled down on his prie-dieu. CHAPTER 44. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 45 of Chicot the Jester by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 45. Chicot, more than ever King of France. The gates of the Louvre were generally closed at 12, but the king gave orders that they should be left open on this night till 1. At 1:45 Quelus came up. "Sire," said he, "the duke has come in." "What is Maugiron doing?" "Watching that he does not go out again." "There is no danger." "Then?" "Let him go to bed quietly. Whom has he with him?" "M. de Monsoreau and his ordinary gentlemen." "And M. de Bussy?" "No, he is not there." "So much the better." "What are your orders, sire?" "Tell Schomberg and D'Epernon to be quick, and let M. de Monsoreau know that I wish to speak to him." 5 minutes after, Schomberg and D'Epernon entered, the former with only a slight blue tint left, which it would take several baths to eradicate, and the latter newly clothed. After them, M. de Monsoreau appeared. "The captain of the guards has just announced to me that your majesty did me the honor to send for me," he said. "Yes, monsieur. When I was out this evening, I saw the stars so brilliant, and the moon so clear, that I thought it would be splendid weather for the chase to morrow. So, monsieur le comte, set off at once for Vincennes, and get a stag turned out ready for me." "But, sire, I thought that to morrow your majesty had given a rendezvous to M. le Duc d'Anjou and M. de Guise, in order to name a chief for the League." "Well, monsieur?" said the king haughtily. "Sire, there might not be time." "There is always time, monsieur, for those who know how to employ it, and that is why I tell you to set off at once, so that you may have all ready for to morrow morning at 10. Quelus, Schomberg, have the door of the Louvre opened for M. de Monsoreau, and have it closed behind him." The chief huntsman retired in astonishment. "It is a whim of the king's," said he to the young men. "Yes." They watched him out, and then returned to the king. "Now," said Henri, "silence, and all 4 of you follow me." "Where are we going, sire?" said D'Epernon. "Those who follow will see." The king took a lantern in his hand, and led the young men along the secret corridor, which led to his brother's rooms. A valet de chambre watched there, but before he had time to warn his master, Henri ordered him to be silent, and the young men pushed him into a room and locked the door. Henri opened his brother's door. François had gone to bed full of dreams of ambition, which the events of the evening had nourished. He had heard his name exalted, and the king's abused. Conducted by the Duc de Guise, he had seen the Parisians open everywhere for him and his gentlemen, while those of the king were insulted and hooted. Never since the commencement of his career had he been so popular, and consequently so hopeful. He had placed on the table a letter from M. de Guise, which had been brought to him by M. de Monsoreau. His surprise and terror were great when he saw the secret door open, and still more when he recognized the king. Henri signed to his companions to remain on the threshold, and advanced to the bed, frowning but silent. "Sire," stammered the duke, "the honor that your majesty does me is so unlooked for." "That it frightens you, does it not? But stay where you are, my brother, do not rise." "But, sire, only permit me," and he drew towards him the letter of M. de Guise. "You are reading?" asked the king. "Yes, sire." "Something interesting to keep you awake at this time of night?" "Oh, sire, nothing very important; the evening courier." "Oh, yes, I understand, the courier of Venus. But no, I see I am wrong. They do not seal billet doux with seals of that size." The duke hid the letter altogether. "How discreet this dear François is," said the king, with a smile which frightened his brother. However, making an effort to recover himself, he said, "Did your majesty wish to say anything particular to me?" "What I have to say to you, monsieur, I wish to say before witnesses. Here, gentlemen," continued he, turning to the 4 young men, "listen to us. I order you." "Sire," said the duke, with a glance full of rage and hatred, "before insulting a man of my rank, you should have refused me the hospitality of the Louvre, in the Hôtel d'Anjou at least.
I should have been free to reply to you."
"Really, you forget, then, that wherever you are my subject, that I am the king, and that every house is mine."
"Sire, I am at the Louvre, at my mother's."
"And your mother is in my house. But to the point, give me that paper."
"Which?"
"That which you were reading, which was on your table, and which you hid when I came in."
"Sire, reflect."
"On what?"
"On this, that you are making a request unworthy of a gentleman, and fit only for a police officer."
The king grew livid. "That letter, monsieur!"
"A woman's letter, sire."
"There are some women's letters very good to see, and dangerous not to see, such as those our mother writes."
"Brother!"
"This letter, monsieur!" cried the king, stamping his foot, "or I will have it torn from you by my Swiss." The duke jumped out of bed, and the letter crumpled in his hand, evidently with the intention of approaching the fire. But Henri, divining his intention, placed himself between him and the fire.
"You would not treat your brother thus!" cried the duke.
"Not my brother, but my mortal enemy. Not my brother, but the Duc d'Anjou, who went all through Paris with M. de Guise, who tries to hide from me a letter from one of his accomplices, the Lorraine princes."
"This time," said the duke, "your police are wrong."
"I tell you I saw on the seal the 3 merlets of Lorraine. Give it to me, mordieu! Or—" Henri advanced toward his brother, and laid his hand on his shoulder. François had no sooner felt the touch of his hand than, falling on his knees, cried out,
"Help! Help! My brother is going to kill me."
These words, uttered in an accent of profound terror, startled the king, and mitigated his rage. The idea passed quickly through his mind that in their family, as by a curse, brother had always assassinated brother. "No, my brother," said he, "you are wrong. I do not wish to hurt you, but you cannot contend with me. I am the master, and if you did not know it before, you know it now."
"Yes, my brother, I acknowledge it."
"Very well, then give me that letter. The king orders it." The duke let it fall, and the king picked it up, but without reading it, put it in his pocket book.
"Is that all?"
said the duke, with his sinister glance. "No, monsieur, you must keep your room until my suspicions with respect to you are completely dissipated. The room is commodious, and not much like a prison. Stay here. You will have good company, at least outside the door, for this night these 4 gentlemen will guard you. Tomorrow they will be relieved by a guard of Swiss."
"But my friends, can I not see them?"
"Who do you call your friends?"
"M. de Monsoreau, M. de Ribeirac, M. Antragues, and M. de Bussy."
"Oh, yes, he, of course."
"Has he had the misfortune to displease your majesty?"
"Yes."
"When, sire?"
"Always, but particularly tonight."
"Tonight? What did he do?"
"Insulted me in the streets of Paris."
"You?"
"My followers, which is the same thing."
"Bussy? You have been deceived, sire."
"I know what I say."
"Sire, M. de Bussy has not been out of his hotel for 2 days. He is at home, ill in bed, burning with fever."
The king turned to Schomberg, who said, "If he had fever, at all events, he had it in the Rue Coquillière."
"Who told you he was there?" said the duke.
"I saw him."
"You saw Bussy out of doors?"
"Yes, looking well and happy, and accompanied by his ordinary follower, that Rémy."
"Then I do not understand it. I saw him in bed myself. He must have deceived me."
"It is well, he will be punished with the rest," said the king.
"If M. de Bussy went out alone after refusing to go out with me—"
"You hear, gentlemen, what my brother says. But we will talk of him another time. Now I recommend my brother to your care. You will have the honor of serving as guard to a prince of the blood." "Oh, sire," said Quelus, "be satisfied. We know what we owe to M. le Duc." "It is well. Adieu, gentlemen."
"Sire," cried the duke, "am I really a prisoner? Are my friends not to visit me, and am I not to go out?"
and the idea of the next day presented itself to his mind, when his presence would be so necessary to M. de Guise.
"Sire," cried he again, "let me at least remain near your majesty. It is my place, and I can be as well guarded there as elsewhere. Sire, grant me this favor."
The king was about to yield to this request and say yes, when his attention was attracted to the door, where a long body, with its arms, its head, and everything that it could move, was making signs to him to say no. It was Chicot. "No," said Henri to his brother, "you are very well here, and here you must stay."
"Sire."
"It is my pleasure, and that is enough," said the king haughtily. "I said I was the real king of France," murmured Chicot. CHAPter 45. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 46 of Chicot the Jester by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 46. How Chicot paid a visit to Bussy, and what followed. The next morning, about 9, Bussy was eating his breakfast and talking with Rémy over the events of the previous day. "Rémy," said he, "did you not think you had seen somewhere that gentleman whom they were dipping in a vat in the Rue Coquillière?" "Yes, monsieur le comte, but I cannot think of his name." "I ought to have helped him," said Bussy. "It is a duty one gentleman owes to another, but really, Rémy, I was too much occupied with my own affairs." "But he must have recognized us, for we were our natural color, and it seemed to me that he rolled his eyes frightfully, and shook his fist at us." "Are you sure of that, Rémy? We must find out who it was. I cannot let such an insult pass." "Oh!" cried Rémy, "I know now who he was." "How so?" "I heard him swear." "I should think so. Anyone would have sworn in such a situation." "Yes, but he swore in German." "Bah!" "Yes, he said, 'Gott verdomme.'" "Then it was Schomberg." "Himself, monsieur le comte." "Then, my dear Rémy, get your salves ready." "Why so, monsieur?" "Because before long you will have to apply them either to his skin or to mine." "You would not be so foolish as to get killed, now you are so well and so happy. St. Marie l'Egyptienne has cursed you once, but she will get tired of working miracles for you." "On the contrary, Rémy, you cannot tell how pleasant it feels to risk your life when you are happy. I assure you, I never fought with a good heart when I had lost so large sums at play, when things had gone wrong, or when I had anything to reproach myself with; but when my purse is full, my heart light, and my conscience clear, I go boldly to the field, for I am sure of my hand. It is then I am brilliant. I should fight well to day, Rémy, for, thanks to you," said he, extending his hand to the young man, "I am very happy." "Stay a moment, however, you will, I hope, deprive yourself of this pleasure. A beautiful lady of my acquaintance made me swear to keep you safe and sound, under the pretext that your life belongs to her." "Good Rémy." "You call me good, Rémy, because I brought you to see Madame de Monsoreau, but shall you call me so when you are separated from her? And unluckily the day approaches, if it be not come." "What do you mean?" "Do you not know that she is going to Anjou, and that I myself have the grief of being separated from Gertrude? Ah!" Bussy could not help smiling at the pretended grief of the young man. "You love her, then?" he said. "I should think so. You should see how she beats me." "And you let her do it?" "Oh, yes." "But to return to Diana, Rémy, when shall we set off?" "Ah, I expected that. On the latest possible day, I should say." "Why so?" "Firstly, because it seems to me that M. le Duc d'Anjou will want you here." "After?" "Because M. de Monsoreau, by a special blessing, does not suspect you in the least, and would suspect something immediately if he saw you disappear from Paris at the same time as his wife." "What do I care for that?" "No, but I care.
I charge myself with curing the sword strokes received in duels, for as you manage your sword well, you never receive very serious ones, but not the blows given secretly by jealous husbands. They are animals, who, in such cases, strike hard. Well, my dear friend, if it is my destiny to be killed by M. de Monsoreau, well, he will kill me. And then, a week after, Madame de Monsoreau will be reconciled to her husband, which will dreadfully enrage your poor soul, which will see it from above or below, without being able to prevent it."
You are right, Rémy. I will live."
"Quite right, but that is not all. You must be charmingly polite to him. He is frightfully jealous of the Duc d'Anjou, who, while you were ill in bed, promenaded before the house with his oreiller. Make advances, then, to this charming husband, and do not even ask him what has become of his wife, since you know quite well."
"You are right, Rémy, I believe. Now I am no longer jealous of the bear. I will be civil to him." At this moment someone knocked at the door. "Who is there?" cried Bussy.
"Monsieur," replied a page, "there is a gentleman below who wishes to speak to you."
"To speak to me so early? Who is it?"
"A tall gentleman dressed in green velvet."
"Can it be Schomberg?"
"He said a tall man."
"True, then Monsoreau, perhaps. Well, let him enter." After a minute the visitor entered. "Monsieur Chicot!" cried Bussy. "Himself, monsieur le comte." Rémy retired into another room, and then Chicot said, "Monsieur, I come to propose to you a little bargain." "Speak, monsieur," said Bussy, in great surprise. "What will you promise me if I render you a great service?" "That depends on the service, monsieur," replied Bussy, disdainfully. Chicot feigned not to remark this air of disdain. "Monsieur," said he, sitting down and crossing his long legs, "I remark that you do not ask me to sit down." The color mounted to Bussy's face. "Monsieur," continued Chicot, "have you heard of the League?" "I have heard much of it," said Bussy. "Well, monsieur, you ought to know that it is an association of honest Christians, united for the purpose of religiously massacring their neighbors, the Huguenots. Are you of the League, monsieur?" "I am." "But, monsieur " "Say only yes or no." "Allow me to express my astonishment." "I did myself the honor of asking you if you belonged to the League." "Monsieur Chicot, as I do not like questions whose import I do not understand, I beg you to change the conversation before I am forced to tell you that I do not like questioners. Come, Monsieur Chicot, we have but a few minutes left." "Well, in a few minutes one can say a great deal. However, I might have dispensed with asking you the question, as if you do not belong to the League now, you soon will, as M. d'Anjou does." "M. d'Anjou? Who told you that?" "Himself, speaking to me in person, as the gentlemen of the law say, or rather write. For example, that dear M. Nicolas David, that star of the Forum Parisiennes. Now that you understand that as M. d'Anjou belongs to the League, you cannot help belonging to it also, you, who are his right arm. The League knows better than to accept a maimed chief." "Well, M. Chicot, what then?" "Why, if you do not belong to it, or they think you are likely to do so, what has happened to his royal highness will certainly happen to you." "And what has happened to him?" "Monsieur," said Chicot, rising, and imitating M. de Bussy's manner of a little before, "I do not love questions, nor questioners, therefore I have a great mind to let them do to you what they have done to night to the duke." "M. Chicot," said Bussy, with a smile, "speak, I beg of you. Where is the duke?" "He is in prison." "Where?" "In his own room, for four of my good friends guard him. M. de Schomberg, who was dyed blue yesterday, as you know, since you passed during the operation; M. d'Epernon, who is yellow from the fright he had; M. de Quelus, who is red with anger; and M. de Maugiron, who is white with ennui. It is beautiful to see, not to speak of the duke, who is going green with terror.
so that we shall have a perfect rainbow to delight our eyes."
"Then, monsieur, you think my liberty is in danger?"
"Danger, monsieur! Suppose that they are already on the way to arrest you."
Bussy shuddered.
"Do you like the Bastile, M. de Bussy? It is a good place for meditation, and M. Laurent Testu, the governor, keeps a good cook."
"They would send me to the Bastile?"
"Ma foi! I ought to have in my pocket something like an order to conduct you there. Would you like to see it?" And Chicot drew from his pocket an order from the king in due form, to apprehend, wherever he might be, M. Louis de Clermont, Seigneur de Bussy. "Written very nicely by M. Quelus," continued Chicot. "Then, monsieur," cried Bussy, "you are really rendering me a service?" "I think so. Do you agree with me?" "Monsieur, I beg you to tell me why you do it, for you love the king and he hates me." "Monsieur le Comte, I save you. Think what you please of my action, but do you forget that I asked for a recompense?"
"Ah, true."
"Well?"
"Most willingly, monsieur."
"Then some day you will do what I ask you?"
"On my honor, if possible."
"That is enough. Now mount your horse and disappear. I go to carry this order to those who are to use it."
"Then you were not to arrest me yourself?"
"I? For what do you take me?"
"But I should abandon my master."
"Have no scruples, he abandons you."
"You are a gentleman, M. Chicot."
Bussy called Rémy. To do him justice, he was listening at the door. "Rémy, our horses." "They are saddled, monsieur." "Ah!" said Chicot, "this young man knows what he is about." Bussy thanked Chicot once more and went down. "Where are we going?" said Rémy.
"Well," said Bussy, hesitating.
"What do you say to Normandy?" said Chicot.
"It is too near."
"Flanders, then."
"Too far."
"Anjou is a reasonable distance, monsieur," said Rémy.
"Well, then, Anjou," said Bussy, coloring.
"Adieu, monsieur," said Chicot.
"It is destiny," said Rémy, when he was gone.
"Let us be quick, and perhaps we may overtake her," said Bussy.
CHAPter 46. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 47 of Chicot the Jester by Alexandre Dumas. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 47. The chess of M. Chicot and the cup and ball of M. Quelus. Chicot returned joyfully to the Louvre. It was a great satisfaction to him to have saved a brave gentleman like Bussy. M. de Guise, after having received in the morning the principal leaguers, who came to bring him the registers filled with signatures, and after having made them all swear to recognize the chief that the king should appoint, went out to visit M. d'Anjou, whom he had lost sight of about 10 the evening before. The duke found the prince's valet rather unquiet at his master's absence, but he imagined that he had slept at the Louvre. The Duc de Guise asked to speak to Aurilly, who was most likely to know where his master was. Aurilly came, but stated he had been separated from the prince the evening before by a pressure of the crowd, and had come to the Hôtel d'Anjou to wait for him, not knowing that his highness had intended to sleep at the Louvre. He added that he had just sent to the Louvre to inquire, and that a message had been returned that the duke was still asleep. "Asleep at 11 o'clock? Not likely. You ought to go to the Louvre, Aurilly." "I did think of it, monseigneur, but I feared that this was only a tale invented to satisfy my messenger, and that the prince was seeking pleasure elsewhere, and might be annoyed at my seeking him." "Oh, no, the duke has too much sense to be pleasure seeking on a day like this. Go to the Louvre, you will be sure to find him there." "I will if you wish it, but what shall I say to him?" "Say that the convocation at the Louvre is fixed for 2 o'clock, and that it is necessary that we should have a conference first. It is not at the time when the king is about to choose a chief for the League that he should be sleeping." "Very well, monseigneur, I will beg his highness to come here." "And say that I am waiting impatiently for him. Meanwhile, I will go and seek M. de Bussy." "But if I do not find his highness, what am I to do?" "Then make no further search for him. In any event, I shall be at the Louvre at 2:15." Aurilly passed through the courtiers who crowded the Louvre, and made his way to the duke's apartments. At the door he found Chicot playing chess. Aurilly tried to pass, but Chicot with his long legs blocked up the doorway. He was forced to touch him on the shoulder. "Ah, it is you, Monsieur Aurilly." "What are you doing, Monsieur Chicot?" "Playing chess, as you see." "All alone?" "Yes, I am studying. Do you play?" "Very little." "Yes, I know you are a musician, and music is so difficult an art, that those who give themselves to it must sacrifice all their time." "You seem very serious over your game." "Yes, it is my king who disquiets me. You must know, Monsieur Aurilly, that at chess the king is a very insignificant person, who has no will, who can only go one step forward or back, or one to the right or left, while he is surrounded by active enemies, by knights who jump 3 squares at a time, by a crowd of pawns who surround him, so that if he be badly counseled, he is a ruined king in no time, ma foi." "But, Monsieur Chicot, how does it happen that you are studying this at the door of his royal highness's room?" "Because I am waiting for Monsieur Quelus, who is in there." "Where?" "With his highness." "With his highness? What is he doing in there? I did not think they were such friends." "Hush!" Then he whispered in Aurilly's ear, "He is come to ask pardon of the duke for a little quarrel they had yesterday." "Really?" "It was the king who insisted on it. You know on what excellent terms the brothers are just now. The king would not suffer an impertinence of Quelus's to pass, and ordered him to apologize." "Really? Ah, Monsieur Aurilly, I think that we are entering the golden age. The Louvre is about to become Arcadia, and the 2 brothers Arcades ambo." Aurilly smiled, and passed into the antechamber, where he was courteously saluted by Quelus, between whose hands a superb cup and ball of ebony inlaid with ivory was making rapid evolutions. "Bravo, Monsieur Quelus," said Aurilly. "Ah, my dear Monsieur Aurilly, when shall I play cup and ball as well as you play the lute?" "When you have studied your plaything as long as I have my instrument. But where is monseigneur? I thought you were with him." "I have an audience with him, but Schomberg comes first." "What, M. de Schomberg also?" "Ah, mon Dieu, yes. The king settled all that. He is in the next room. Enter, Monsieur Aurilly, and remind the prince that we are waiting for him." Aurilly opened the second door, and saw Schomberg reclining on a kind of couch, from which he amused himself by sending from a tube little balls of earth through a gold ring suspended from the ceiling by a silk thread, while a favorite dog brought him back the balls as they fell. "Ah! Guten Morgen, Monsieur Aurilly. You see I am amusing myself while I wait for my audience." "But where is monseigneur?" "Oh, he is occupied in pardoning D'Epernon and Maugiron. But will you not enter, you who are privileged?" "Perhaps it would be indiscreet." "Not at all. Enter, Monsieur Aurilly, enter." And he pushed him into the next room, where the astonished musician perceived D'Epernon before a mirror, occupied in stiffening his moustachios, while Maugiron, seated near the window, was cutting out engravings, by the side of which the bas reliefs on the temple of Venus Aphrodite would have looked holy. The duke, without his sword, was in his armchair between these 2 men, who only looked at him to watch his movements, and only spoke to him to say something disagreeable. Seeing Aurilly, he got up to meet him. "Take care, monseigneur," said Maugiron, "you are stepping on my figures." "Mon Dieu!" cried the musician, "he insults my master." "Dear Monsieur Aurilly," said D'Epernon, still arranging his moustachios, "how are you?" "Be so kind as to bring me here your little dagger," said Maugiron. "Gentlemen, gentlemen, do you not remember where you are?" "Yes, yes, my dear Orpheus, that is why I ask for your dagger. Do you see, Monsieur le Duc has none?"
"Aurilly," cried the duke, in a tone full of grief and rage, "do you not see that I am a prisoner?" "A prisoner? To whom?" "To my brother. You might know that by my jailers." "Oh, if I had but guessed it!" "You would have brought your lute to amuse his highness," said a mocking voice behind them. "But I thought of it, and sent for it. Here it is." "How does your chess go on, Chicot?" said D'Epernon. "I believe I shall save the king, but it is not without trouble. Come, M. Aurilly, give me your poniard in return for the lute, a fair exchange." The astonished musician obeyed. "There is one rat in the trap," said Quelus, who returned to his post in the antechamber, only exchanging his cup and ball for Schomberg's shooting tube. "It is amusing to vary one's pleasures," said Chicot, "so for a change I will go and sign the league." CHAPTER XLVIII. Savannah, Georgia.
Chapter 48 of Chicot the Jester by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 48. The reception of the chiefs of the League. The time for the great reception drew near. Paris, nearly as tumultuous as the evening before, had sent toward the Louvre its deputation of leaguers, its bodies of workmen, its sheriffs, its militia, and its constantly increasing masses of spectators. The king, on his throne in the great hall, was surrounded by his officers, his friends, his courtiers, and his family, waiting for all the corporations to defile before him, when M. de Monsoreau entered abruptly. "Look, Henrietta," said Chicot, who was standing near the king. "At what?" "At your chief huntsman. Pardieu, he is well worth it. See how pale and dirty he is." Henri made a sign to M. de Monsoreau, who approached. "How is it that you are at the Louvre, monsieur? I thought you at Vincennes." "Sire, the stag was turned off at 7 o'clock this morning, but when noon came, and I had no news, I feared that some misfortune had happened to your majesty, and I returned." "Really?" "Sire, if I have done wrong, attribute it to an excess of devotion." "Yes, monsieur, and I appreciate it." "Now," said the count, hesitatingly, "if your majesty wishes me to return to Vincennes, as I am reassured " "No, no, stay. This chase was a fancy which came into our head, and which went as it came. Do not go away. I want near me devoted subjects, and you have just classified yourself as such." Monsoreau bowed, and said, "Where does your majesty wish me to remain?" "Will you give him to me for half an hour?" said Chicot to the king, in a low voice. "What for?" "To torment him a little. You owe me some compensation for obliging me to be present at this tiresome ceremony." "Well, take him." "Where does your majesty wish me to stand?" again asked M. de Monsoreau. "Where you like. Go behind my armchair, that is where I put my friends." "Come here," said Chicot, making room for M. de Monsoreau. "Come and get the scent of these fellows. Here is game which can be tracked without a hound. Here are the shoemakers who pass, or rather who have passed. Then there are the tanners. Mort de ma vie, if you lose their scent, I will take away your place." M. de Monsoreau listened mechanically. He seemed preoccupied, and looked around him anxiously. "Do you know what your chief huntsman is hunting for now?" said Chicot, in an undertone to the king. "No." "Your brother." "The game is not in sight." "Just ask him where his countess is." "What for?" "Just ask." "Monsieur le Comte," said Henri, "what have you done with Madame de Monsoreau? I do not see her here." The count started, but replied, "Sire, she is ill. The air of Paris did not agree with her, so having obtained leave from the queen, she set out last night with her father for Méridor." "Paris is not good for women in her situation," said Chicot. Monsoreau grew pale, and looked furiously at him. "This poor countess," continued Chicot, "she will die of ennui by the way." "I said that she traveled with her father." "A father is very respectable, I allow, but not very amusing. and if she had only that worthy baron to amuse her, it would be sad, but luckily—" "What?" cried the count. "What? What do you mean by luckily?" "Ah, it was an ellipsis I used." The count shrugged his shoulders. "Oh, but it was. Ask Henry, who is a man of letters." "Yes," said the king, "but what did your adverb mean?" "What adverb?" "Luckily." "Luckily means luckily. Luckily, then, there exist some of our friends, and very amusing ones, who if they meet the countess will amuse her, and as they are going the same way, it is probable they will. Oh, I see them from here, do you not, Henry? You who are a man of imagination, there they go on a good road, well mounted, and saying sweet things to Madame la Comtesse, which she likes very much, dear lady." M. de Monsoreau was furious, but he could not show it before the king, so he said as mildly as he could, "What, have you friends traveling to Anjou?" "Good, pretend to be mysterious." "I swear to you—" "Oh, you know they are there, although I saw you just now seeking for them mechanically among the crowd." "You saw me?" "Yes, you, the palest of all chief huntsmen, past, present, and future, from Nimrod to M. d'Alfort, your predecessor." "Monsieur Chicot." "The palest, I repeat." "Monsieur, will you return to the friends of whom you spoke, and be so good as to name them, if your superabundant imagination will let you?" "Seek, monsieur, morbleu, it is your occupation to hunt out animals. Witness the unlucky stag whom you deranged this morning, and who thought it very unkind of you. Seek." The eyes of M. de Monsoreau wandered anxiously again. "What!" cried he, seeing a vacant place by the king, "not the Duc d'Anjou?" "Taint, taint! The beast is found." "He is gone to day?" "He is gone to day, but it is possible that he set out last night. When did your brother disappear, Henry?" "Last night." "The duke is gone?" murmured Monsoreau, paler than ever. "I do not say he is gone, I say only that he disappeared last night, and that his best friends do not know where he is," said the king. "Oh!" cried the count, "if I thought so!" "Well, what should you do? Besides, what harm if he does talk nonsense to Madame de Monsoreau? He is the gallant of the family, you know." "I am lost," murmured the count, trying to go away, but Chicot detained him. "Keep still, mordieu, you shake the king's chair. Mort de ma vie, your wife will be quite happy with the prince to talk to, and M. Aurilly to play the lute to her." Monsoreau trembled with anger. "Quietly, monsieur," continued Chicot, "hide your joy. Here is the business beginning. You should not show your feelings so openly. Listen to the discourse of the king." M. de Monsoreau was forced to keep quiet. M. de Guise entered and knelt before the king, not without throwing an uneasy glance of surprise on the vacant seat of M. d'Anjou. The king rose, and the heralds commanded silence. CHAPTER XLIX. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 49 of Chicot the Jester by Alexandre Dumas. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 49. How the king annexed a chief who was neither the Duc de Guise nor M. d'Anjou. "Gentlemen," said the king, after assuring himself that his 4 friends, now replaced by 10 Swiss, were behind him, "a king hears equally the voices which come to him from above and from below, that is to say, what is commanded by God or asked by his people. I understand perfectly that there is a guarantee for my people in the association of all classes, which has been formed to defend the Catholic faith, and therefore I approve the counsels of my cousin De Guise. I declare, then, the Holy League duly constituted, and as so great a body must have a powerful head, and as it is necessary that the chief called to sustain the church should be one of its most zealous sons, I choose a Christian prince for the chief, and declare that this chief shall be—" He made a slight pause. "Henry de Valois, King of France and Poland." The Duc de Guise was thunderstruck. Large drops stood on his forehead, and he looked from one to the other of his brothers. All the Leaguers uttered a murmur of surprise and discontent. The cardinal stole up to his brother and whispered, "François, I fear we are no longer in safety here. Let us haste to take leave, for the populace is uncertain, and the king whom they execrated yesterday will be their idol for 2 or 3 days." During this time the king had signed the act prepared beforehand by M. de Morvilliers, the only person, with the exception of the queen mother, who was in the secret. Then he passed the pen to the Duc de Guise, saying, "Sign, my cousin, there, below me. Now pass it to M. le Cardinal and M. de Mayenne." But these two had already disappeared. The king remarked their absence, and added, "Then pass the pen to M. de Monsoreau." The duke did so, and was about to retire, but the king said, "Wait." And while the others signed, he added, "My cousin, it was your advice, I believe, to guard Paris with a good army, composed of all the forces of the League. The army is made, and the natural general of the Parisians is the king." "Assuredly, sire." "But I do not forget that there is another army to command, and that this belongs of right to the bravest soldier in my kingdom. Therefore go and command the army." "And when am I to set out, sire?" "Immediately." "Henri, Henri," whispered Chicot; but in spite of his signs and grimaces, the king gave the duke his brevet ready signed. He took it and retired, and was soon out of Paris. The rest of the assembly dispersed gradually, crying, "Vive le roi!" and "Vive la Ligue!" "Oh, sire," cried the favorites, approaching the king, "what a sublime idea you have had!" "They think that gold is going to rain on them like manna," said Chicot, who followed his master about everywhere with lamentations. As soon as they were left alone, "Ha, Monsieur Chicot," said Henri, "you are never content. Diable! I do not ask even for complaisance, but for good sense." "You are right, Henri, it is what you want most." "Confess I have done well." "That is just what I do not think." "Ah, you are jealous, Monsieur Roi de France." "I, Heaven forbid! I shall choose better subjects for jealousy." "Corbleu!" "Oh, what self love!" "Am I or not king of the League?" "Certainly you are, but " "But what?" "You are no longer king of France." "And who is then?" "Everybody except you. Firstly, your brother." "My brother?" "Yes, M. d'Anjou." "Whom I hold prisoner." "Yes, but prisoner as he is, he was consecrated." "By whom was he consecrated?" "By the Cardinal de Guise. Really, Henri, you have a fine police. They consecrate a king at Paris before 33 people, in the church of St. Geneviève, and you do not know of it." "Oh! and you do?" "Certainly I do." "How can you know what I do not?" "Ha! because M. de Morvilliers manages your police, and I am my own." The king frowned. "Well, then, without counting Henri de Valois, we have François d'Anjou for king," continued Chicot, "and then there is the Duc de Guise." "The Duc de Guise?" "Yes, Henri de Guise, Henri le Beaufrey." "A fine king, whom I exile, whom I send to the army." "Good, as if you were not exiled to Poland, and La Charité is nearer to the Louvre than Cracow is. Ah, yes, you send him to the army, that is so clever; that is to say, you put 30,000 men under his orders. Ventre de biche! And a real army, not like your army of the League. No, no, an army of bourgeois is good for Henri de Valois, but Henri de Guise must have an army of soldiers. And what soldiers? Hardened warriors, capable of destroying 20 armies of the League, so that if, being king in fact, Henri de Guise had the folly one day to wish to be so in name, he would only have to turn towards the capital and say, 'Let us swallow Paris, and Henri de Valois and the Louvre at a mouthful,' and the rogues would do it. I know them." "You forget one thing in your argument, illustrious politician." "Ah, diable! It is possible, if you mean a fourth king." "No, You forget that before thinking of reigning in France, when a Valois is on the throne, it would be necessary to look back and count your ancestors. That such an idea might come to M. d'Anjou is possible. His ancestors are mine, and it is only a question of primogeniture. But M. de Guise—" "Ah, that is just where you are in error." "How so?" "M. de Guise is of a better race than you think." "Better than me, perhaps," said Henri, smiling. "There is no perhaps in it." "You are mad. Learn to read, my friend." "Well, Henri, you who can read, read this." And he drew from his pocket the genealogy, which we know already, handing it to Henri, who turned pale as he recognized, near to the signature of the prelate, the seal of St. Peter. "What do you say, Henri? Are not your fleurs de lis thrown a little in the background?" "But how did you get this genealogy?" Do I seek these things? It came to me." "Where?" "Under the bolster of a lawyer." "And what was his name?" "M. Nicolas David." "Where was he?" "At Lyons." "And who took it from under the bolster?" "One of my good friends." "Who is he?" "A monk." "His name?" "Gorenflot." "What! that abominable leaguer, who uttered those incendiary discourses at St. Geneviève, and again yesterday in the streets of Paris?" "You remember the history of Brutus, who pretended to be a fool." "He is, then, a profound politician? Did he take it from the advocate?" "Yes, by force." "Then he is brave?" "Brave as Bayard." "And having done this, he has not asked for any recompense?" "He returned humbly to his convent, and only asks me to forget that he ever came out." "Then he is modest." "As Saint Crepin." "Chicot, your friend shall be made a prior on the first vacancy." "Thanks for him, Henri." "Ma foi," said Chicot to himself, "if he escapes being hung by Mayenne, he will have an abbey." CHAPter 49. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 50 of Chicot the Jester by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 50. Eteocles and Polynices. This day of the League terminated brilliantly and tumultuously as it began. The friends of the king rejoiced, the preachers proposed to canonize Brother Henry, and spoke everywhere of the great deeds of the Valois. The favorites said, "The lion is roused." The leaguers said, "The fox has discovered the snare." The three Lorraine princes, as we have seen, had left Paris, and their principal agent, M. de Monsoreau, was ready to start for Anjou, but as he was leaving the Louvre, Chicot stopped him. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" said he. "To his highness." "His highness?" "Yes, I am unquiet about him. We do not live in times when a prince ought to travel without a good escort." "Well, if you are unquiet, so am I." "About what?" "About his highness also." "Why?" "Do you not know what they say?" "That he has gone to Anjou." "No, that he is dead." "Bah!" said Monsoreau, with a tone of surprise, not unmixed with joy. "You told me he was traveling." "Diable! They persuaded me so, but now I have good reason to think that if the poor prince be traveling, it is to another world." "What gives you these mournful ideas?" "He entered the Louvre yesterday, did he not?" "Certainly, I came in with him." "Well, he has never been seen to come out." "From the Louvre?" "No." "Where is Aurilly?" "Disappeared." "But his people?" "Disappeared." "You are joking, are you not, M. Chicot?" "Ask." "Whom?" "The king." "I cannot question his majesty." "Oh, yes, if you go about it in the right way." "Well," said the count, I cannot remain in this uncertainty." And leaving Chicot, he went to the king's apartment. "Where is the king?" he asked. "I have to render an account to him of the execution of some orders he gave me." "With M. le Duc d'Anjou," replied the man. "With the duke? Then he is not dead?" "I am not so sure of that." M. de Monsoreau was thoroughly bewildered, for if M. d'Anjou were in the Louvre, his absence on such a day was unaccountable. Immediately after this sitting, Quelus, Maugiron, Schomberg, and D'Epernon, in spite of the ennui they experienced there, were so anxious to be disagreeable to the duke that they returned to him. He, on his part, was mortally ennuyé, as well as anxious, which, it must be confessed, the conversation of these gentlemen was not calculated to remove. "Do you know, Quelus," said Maugiron, "that it is only now I begin to appreciate our friend Valois. Really, he is a great politician." "Explain yourself," said Quelus, who was lounging on a chair. "While he was afraid of the conspiracy, he kept it quiet. Now he speaks of it openly, therefore he is no longer afraid of it." "Well?" "If he no longer fears it, he will punish it. You know Valois. He has certainly many good qualities, but clemency is not one of them." "Granted." "Then if he punishes these conspirators, there will be a trial, and we shall have a fine spectacle." "Unless, which is possible, on account of the rank of the accused, they arrange it all quietly." "That would be my advice, certainly; it is better in family affairs." Aurilly glanced at the prince. "Ma foi," said Maugiron, "I know only one thing, that in the king's place I would not spare the high heads, which are always the most guilty. I would make an example of one or two, one at all events." "I think it would be well to revive the famous invention of sacks." "What was that?" "A royal fancy in the year 1550. They shut up a man in a sack, in company with 3 or 4 cats, and threw them into the water. The minute the cats felt the water they attacked the man, and there passed in the sack things which unluckily could never be seen." "Really, Quelus, you are a well of science, and your conversation is most interesting." "They could not apply this invention to the chiefs, they have the right to be beheaded, but to the small fry, I mean the favorites, squires, and lute players." "Gentlemen," stammered Aurilly. "Do not reply to them, Aurilly," said François, "it cannot be addressed to me." As he spoke, the king appeared on the threshold. The duke rose. "Sire," cried he, "I appeal against the unworthy treatment I meet with from your followers." Henri did not seem to hear. "Good morning, Quelus," said he, kissing his favorite on both cheeks. "Good morning; the sight of you rejoices my soul. And you, my poor Maugiron, how are you?" "I am terribly ennuyé, sire. When I undertook to guard your brother, I thought he was more amusing. Oh, the tiresome prince! Are you sure he is the son of your father and mother?" "Sire, you hear?" cried the prince. "Is it your wish that your brother should be so insulted?" "Silence, monsieur," said Henri. "I do not like my prisoners to complain." "Prisoner or not, I am your " "The title which you are about to invoke," interrupted the king, "is fatal to you. My brother guilty is doubly guilty." "But if he is not?" "He is." "Of what crime?" "Of having displeased me." "Sire, have our family quarrels need of witnesses?" "You are right, monsieur. My friends, let me speak a little to my brother." "I will take Aurilly," said Maugiron. "Now we are alone, monsieur," said the king, when they were gone. "I waited for this moment impatiently." "And I also. Ah! you want my crown, my worthy Eteocles. You made of the League a means, and of the throne an aim, and were consecrated in a corner of Paris, to be able to proclaim yourself to the Parisians, shining with holy oil." "Alas! your majesty will not let me speak." "What for? To lie, or to tell me things which I know already? But no, you would lie, for to confess what you have done would be to confess that you merit death.
You would lie, and I would spare you that shame."
"My brother, is it your intention to overwhelm me with outrages?"
"If what I say is an outrage, it is I who lie, and I ask no better. Speak, then, I listen. Tell me you are not disloyal, and at the same time unskillful."
"I do not know what your majesty means. You speak enigmas."
"Then I will explain my words. You have conspired against me, as formerly you conspired against my brother Charles, only then it was by the aid of Henry of Navarre, and now it is with the assistance of the Duc de Guise. It is true that formerly you crawled like a serpent, now you wish to spring like the lion, after perfidy, open force, after poison, the sword."
"Poison? What do you mean?"
cried François, with flashing eyes. "The poison with which you assassinated our brother Charles, which you destined for Henry of Navarre, your associate. The fatal poison is known, our mother has used it so often, which is doubtless the reason why you renounced it on this occasion, and preferred rather the part of captain of the League. But look me in the face, François, and learn that a man like you shall never kill me. A sword! Ah! I should like to see you here in this room alone with me, holding a sword. I have conquered you in cunning, and in a combat you would be killed. Dream no longer of struggling against me in any manner, for from this moment I act as king, as master, as despot. I will watch you everywhere, follow you everywhere, and at the least suspicion I will throw you to the axe of my executioner. This is what I had to say to you in private, and I will order you to be left alone tonight to ponder over my words."
"Then, sire, for a suspicion, I have fallen into disgrace with you?"
"Say, under my justice."
"But at least, sire, fix a term to my captivity, that I may know what to expect."
"You will know when you hear your sentence read."
"Can I not see my mother?"
"What for? There were but 3 copies in the world of the famous hunting book which killed my poor brother, and of the 2 others, one is in London and the other at Florence. Besides, I am not a Nimrod like my poor brother. Adieu, François."
"Gentlemen,"
said the king, opening the door, "the Duc d'Anjou has requested to be alone tonight to reflect on an answer he has to make me tomorrow morning. Leave him alone, then, except occasional visits of precaution. If he be troublesome, call me. I have the Bastile ready, and the governor, Monsieur Laurent Testu, is the best man in the world to conquer ill tempers."
"Sire,"
cried François, trying a last effort, "remember I am your—" "You are also the brother of Charles IX., I think."
"At least restore me to my friends."
"I deprive myself of mine to give them to you," said Henri. And Henri shut the door, while the duke fell in despair into his armchair. CHAPter 50. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 51 of Chicot the Jester by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 51. How people do not always lose their time by searching empty drawers. The scene which the duke had just had with the king made him regard his position as desperate. The minions had not allowed him to be ignorant of what had passed, and he had heard the people cry, "Vive le roi." He felt himself abandoned by the other chiefs, who had themselves to save. In his quarrels with his brother Charles, he had always had for confidants, or rather dupes, those 2 devoted men, Coconnas and La Mole, and for the first time in his life, feeling himself alone and isolated, he felt a kind of remorse at having sacrificed them. During that time his sister Marguerite loved and consoled him. How had he recompensed her? He had recently had near him a brave and valiant heart and sword, Bussy, the brave Bussy, and he had offended him to please Monsoreau, who had his secret, with which he always threatened him, and which was now known to the king. He had therefore quarreled with Bussy gratuitously, and above all uselessly, which, as a great politician once said, was more than a crime, it was a mistake. How he would have rejoiced in his present situation to know that Bussy was watching over him, Bussy the loyal, Bussy the universal favorite. It would have been probable liberty and certain vengeance. But, as we have said, Bussy, wounded to the heart, kept away from the prince, so that the prisoner remained 50 feet above the ground, with the 4 favorites in the corridor, without counting the court full of Swiss. Besides this, one or other of the young men entered from time to time, and, without seeming even to notice the prince, went round the room, examined the doors and windows, looked under the beds and tables, and glanced at the curtains and sheets. "Ma foi," said Maugiron, after one of these visits, "I have done. I am not going to look after him any more to night." "Yes," said D'Epernon, "as long as we guard him, there is no need of going to look at him." "And he is not handsome to look at," said Quelus. "Still," said Schomberg, "I think we had better not relax our vigilance, for the devil is cunning." "Yes, but not cunning enough to pass over the bodies of 4 men like us." "That is true," said Quelus. "Oh," said Schomberg, "do you think, if he wants to fly, he will choose our corridor to come through? He would make a hole in the wall." "With what?" "Then he has the windows." "Ah, the windows! Bravo, Schomberg! Would you jump 45 feet?" "I confess that 45 feet." "Yes, and he who is lame and heavy and timid as " "You," said Schomberg. "You know I fear nothing but phantoms. That is an affair of the nerves." "The last phantom was," said Quelus, "that all those whom he had killed in duels appeared to him one night." "However," said Maugiron, "I have read of wonderful escapes, with sheets, for instance." "Ah, that is more sensible. I saw myself at Bordeaux a prisoner who escaped by the aid of his sheets." "You see, then?" "Yes, but he had his leg broken, and his neck too. His sheets were 30 feet too short, and he had to jump, so that while his body escaped from prison, his soul escaped from his body." "Besides," said Quelus, "if he escapes, we will follow him, and in catching him some mischief might happen to him." So they dismissed the subject. They were perfectly right that the duke was not likely to attempt a perilous escape. From time to time his pale face was at the window which overlooked the fosses of the Louvre, beyond which was an open space about 15 feet broad, and then the Seine rolled calm as a mirror. On the other side rose, like a giant, the tower of Nesle. He had watched the sunset and the gradual extinction of all the lights. He had contemplated the beautiful spectacle of old Paris, with its roofs gilded by the last rays of the sun, and silvered by the first beams of the moon. Then, little by little, he was seized with a great terror at seeing immense clouds roll over the sky and announce a storm. Among his other weaknesses, the Duc d'Anjou was afraid of thunder, and he would have given anything to have had his guardians with him again, even if they insulted him. He threw himself on his bed, but found it impossible to sleep. Then he began to swear and break everything near him. It was a family failing, and they were accustomed to it at the Louvre. The young men had opened the door to see what the noise meant, and seeing that it was the duke amusing himself, they had shut it again, which redoubled his anger. He had just broken a chair, when a crashing of glass was heard at the window, and he felt a sharp blow on his thigh. His first idea was that he was wounded by some emissary of the king's. "Ah, I am dead!" he cried, and fell on the carpet. But as he fell, his hand came in contact with a larger and rougher substance than a ball. "Oh, a stone!" thought he, and feeling his leg, he found it uninjured. He picked up the stone and looked at it, and saw that it was wrapped in a piece of paper. Then the duke's ideas began to change. Might not this stone come from a friend as well as an enemy? He approached the light, cut the silk which tied the paper around the stone, and read: "Are you tired of keeping your room? Do you love open air and liberty? Enter the little room where the Queen of Navarre hid your poor friend, M. de la Mole. Open the cupboard, and, by displacing the lowest bracket, you will find a double bottom. In this there is a silk ladder. Attach it yourself to the balcony. 2 vigorous arms will hold it at the bottom. A horse swift as thought will lead you to a safe place. A friend." "A friend?" cried the prince. "Oh, I did not know I had a friend. Who is this friend who thinks of me?" And the duke ran to the window, but could see no one. "Can it be a snare?" thought he. "But first let me see if there is a double bottom and a ladder." The duke then, leaving the light where it was for precaution, groped his way to the cabinet, which he knew so well. He opened it, felt for the bottom shelf, and to his great joy found what he looked for. As a thief escapes with his booty, the duke rushed into the next room with his prey. 10 o'clock struck. The duke thought of his hourly visitors, and hid his ladder under a cushion, on which he sat down. Indeed, 5 minutes had not passed before Maugiron appeared in a dressing gown, with a sword in one hand and a light in the other. As he came in, one of his friends said to him, "The bear is furious. He was breaking everything just now. Take care he does not devour you, Maugiron." Maugiron made his usual examination. He saw a broken window, but thought the duke had done it in his rage. "Maugiron," cried Schomberg from outside, "are you already eaten that you do not speak? In that case, sigh at least, that we may know and avenge you." The duke trembled with impatience. "No, no," said Maugiron, "on the contrary, my bear is quite conquered." And so saying, he went out and locked the door. When the key had ceased to turn in the lock, the duke murmured, "Take care, gentlemen, or the duke will be too much for you." Chapter 51. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 52 of Chicot the Jester by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 52. Ventre Saint Gris. Left alone, the duke, knowing he had at least an hour before him, drew out his ladder and carefully examined the fastenings. "The ladder is good," said he at length, "and will not break." Then he unrolled it all, and counted 38 rounds of 15 inches each. "The length is sufficient," said he, "there is nothing to fear on that point. Ah, but if it were some of those cursed minions who sent me to the ladder! If I attach it to the balcony, they will let me do it, and while I am descending they will cut the cords. But no, they could not be foolish enough to think I would fly without barricading the door, and I should have time to fly before they could force it. But what person in the world, except my sister herself, could know of a ladder hidden in her dressing room? What friend of mine can it be?" Suddenly an idea struck him, and he cried, "Bussy!" Indeed, Bussy, whom so many ladies adored, Bussy was a hero to the Queen of Navarre, and his only true friend. Was it Bussy? Everything made him think so. The duke, of course, did not know all his motives for being angry with him, for he did not know his love for Diana, and believed him to be too noble to think of resentment when his master was a prisoner. He approached the window again, and fancied he could see in the fog the indistinct forms of 3 horses and 2 men by the river. 2 men. These must be Bussy and Rémy. He then looked through the keyhole, and saw his 4 guardians. 2 were asleep, and 2 had inherited Chicot's chessboard, and were playing. He extinguished his light. Then he opened his window and looked over the balcony. The gulf below him looked dreadful in the darkness, and he drew back. But air and liberty have an attraction so irresistible to a prisoner, that François, on withdrawing from the window, felt as if he were being stifled, and for an instant something like disgust of life, or indifference to death, passed through his mind. He fancied he was growing courageous, and profiting by this moment of excitement, he seized the ladder, fixed it to the balcony, then barricaded the door as well as he could, and returned to the window. The darkness was now great, and the first growlings of the storm began to make themselves heard. A great cloud with silver fringes extended itself like a recumbent elephant from one side to the other of the river. A flash of lightning broke the immense cloud for a moment, and the prince fancied that he saw below him in the fosse the same figures he had imagined before. A horse neighed. There was no more doubt, he was waited for. He shook the ladder to see if it was firm. Then he put his leg over the balustrade, and placed his foot on the first step. Nothing can describe the anguish of the prisoner at this moment, placed between a frail silk cord on the one hand and his brother's cruel menaces on the other. But as he stood there he felt the ladder stiffened. Someone held it. Was it a friend or an enemy? Were they open arms or armed ones which waited for him? An irresistible terror seized him. He still held the balcony with his left hand, and made a movement to remount, when a very slight pull at the ladder came to him like a solicitation. He took courage and tried the second step. The ladder was held as firm as a rock, and he found a steady support for his foot. He descended rapidly, almost gliding down, when, all at once, instead of touching the earth, which he knew to be near, he felt himself seized in the arms of a man who whispered, "You are saved." Then he was carried along the fosse till they came to the end, when another man seized him by the collar and drew him up, and after having aided his companion in the same way, they ran to the river where stood the horses. The prince knew he was at the mercy of his saviors, so he jumped at once on a horse, and his companions did the same. The same voice now said, "Quick!" and they set off at a gallop.
"All goes well at present," thought the prince. "Let us hope it will end so. Thanks, my brave Bussy,"
said he to his companion on the right, who was entirely covered with a large cloak. "Quick!" replied the other. They arrived thus at the great ditch of the Bastile, which they crossed on a bridge improvised by the Leaguers the night before. The three cavaliers rode towards Charenton, when all at once the man on the right entered the forest of Vincennes, saying only, "Come." The prince's horse neighed, and several others answered from the depths of the forest. François would have stopped if he could, for he feared they were taking him to an ambush, but it was too late, and in a few minutes he found himself in a small open space where 8 or 10 men on horseback were drawn up.
"Oh, oh!" said the prince, "what does this mean, monsieur?"
"Ventre Saint Gris, it means that we are saved."
"You, Henri!" cried the duke, stupefied. "You, my liberator?"
"Does that astonish you? Are we not related, Agrippa?" continued he, looking round for his companion. "Here I am," said d'Aubigné. "Are there 2 fresh horses with which we can go a dozen leagues without stopping?"
"But where are you taking me, my cousin?"
"Where you like, only be quick, for the king of France has more horses than I have, and is rich enough to kill a dozen if he wishes to catch us."
"Really? Then I am free to go where I like."
"Certainly, I wait your orders."
"Well, then, to Angers."
"To Angers, so be it. There you are at home."
"But you?"
"I? When we are in sight of Angers I shall leave you, and ride on to Navarre, where my good Margot expects me, and must be much ennuyée at my absence."
"But no one knew you were here?"
"I came to sell 3 diamonds of my wife's."
"Ah, very well."
"And also to know if this league was really going to ruin me."
"You see there is nothing in it."
"Thanks to you, no."
"How, thanks to me?"
"Certainly, if instead of refusing to be chief of the league, when you knew it was directed against me, you had accepted, I was ruined. Therefore, when I heard that the king had punished your refusal with imprisonment, I swore to release you, and I have done so."
"Always so simple minded," thought François. "Really, it is easy to deceive him."
"Now for Anjou," thought the king. "Ah, M. de Guise, I send you a companion you do not want."
CHAPTER 52. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 53 of Chicot the Jester by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 53. The Friends. While Paris was in this ferment, Madame de Monsoreau, escorted by her father and 2 servants, pursued their way to Méridor. She began to enjoy her liberty, precious to those who have suffered. The azure of the sky, compared to that which hung always menacingly over the black towers of the Bastile, the trees already green, all appeared to her fresh and young, beautiful and new, as if she had really come out of the tomb where her father had believed her. He, the old baron, had grown young again. We will not attempt to describe their long journey, free from incidents. Several times the baron said to Diana, "Do not fear, my daughter."
"Fear what?"
"Were you not looking if M. de Monsoreau was following us?"
"Yes, it was true, I did look,"
replied she, with a sigh and another glance behind. At last, on the 8th day, they reached the château of Méridor, and were received by Madame de St. Luc and her husband. Then began for these 4 people one of those existences of which every man has dreamed in reading Virgil or Theocritus. The baron and St. Luc hunted from morning till evening. You might have seen troops of dogs rushing from the hills in pursuit of some hare or fox, and startling Diana and Jeanne, as they sat side by side on the moss, under the shade of the trees.
"Recount to me," said Jeanne, "all that happened to you in the tomb, for you were dead to us. See, the hawthorn is shedding on us its last flowers, and the elders send out their perfume. Not a breath in the air, not a human being near us. Recount, little sister." "What can I say?" "Tell me, are you happy? That beautiful eye often swimming in tears, the paleness of your cheeks, that mouth which tries a smile, which it never finishes. Diana, you must have many things to tell me." "No, nothing." "You are then happy with M. de Monsoreau?"
Diana shuddered.
"You see," said Jeanne. "With M. de Monsoreau! Why did you pronounce that name? Why do you evoke that phantom in the midst of our woods, our flowers, our happiness?" "You told me, I think," said Jeanne, "that M. de Bussy showed much interest in you."
Diana reddened, even to her round, pretty ears.
"He is a charming creature," continued Jeanne, kissing Diana. "It is folly," said Diana. "M. de Bussy thinks no more of Diana de Méridor." "That is possible, but I believe he pleases Diana de Monsoreau a little." "Do not say that." "Does it displease you?" "I tell you he thinks no more of me, and he does well. Oh, I was cowardly." "What do you say?" "Nothing, nothing." "Now, Diana, do not cry, do not accuse yourself. You cowardly! You, my heroine! You were constrained." "I believed it. I saw dangers, gulfs under my feet. Now, Jeanne, these dangers seem to me chimerical, these gulfs as if a child could cross them. I was cowardly, I tell you. Oh, I had no time to reflect." "You speak in enigmas." "No," cried Diana, rising, "it was not my fault, it was his. The Duc d'Anjou was against him. But when one wishes a thing, when one loves, neither prince nor master should keep you back. See, Jeanne, if I loved—" "Be calm, dear friend." "I tell you, we were cowardly." "We? Of whom do you speak?" "That we is eloquent, my dearest Diana." I mean my father and I. You did not think anything else, did you? My father is a nobleman. He might have spoken to the king. I am proud, and do not fear a man when I hate him, but he did not love me." "You lie to yourself. You know the contrary, little hypocrite." "You may believe in love, Jeanne, you whom M. de St. Luc married in spite of the king, you whom he carried away from Paris, you who pay him by your caresses for proscription and exile." "And he thinks himself richly repaid." "But I, reflect a little, do not be egotistical. I, whom that fiery young man pretended to love, I, who fixed the regards of that invincible Bussy, he who fears no one, I was alone with him in the cloister of l'Egyptienne. We were alone, but for Gertrude and Rémy, our accomplices. He could have carried me off. At that moment I saw him suffering because of me. I saw his eyes languishing, his lips pale and parched with fever. If he had asked me to die to restore the brightness to his eyes and the freshness to his lips, I should have died. Well, I went away, and he never tried to detain me. Wait, still, he knew that I was leaving Paris, that I was returning to Méridor. He knew that M. de Monsoreau, I blush as I tell it, was only my husband in name. He knew that I traveled alone and along the road. Dear Jeanne, I kept turning, thinking I heard the gallop of his horse behind us, but no, it was only the echo of my own. I tell you, he does not think of me. I am not worth a journey to Anjou, while there are so many beautiful women at the court of France, whose smiles are worth 100 confessions from the provincial buried at Méridor. Do you understand now? Am I forgotten, despised?"
She had not finished, when the foliage of the oak rustled, a quantity of mortar and moss fell from the old wall, and a man threw himself at the feet of Diana, who uttered an affrighted cry. Jeanne ran away. She recognized him. "Here I am!" cried Bussy, kissing the dress of Diana. She too recognized him, and, overcome by this unexpected happiness,
fell unconscious into the arms of him whom she had just accused of indifference. Chapter 53. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia.